Texas and how much better it's doing than other places. And then again, some of the pressure we've got facing us from the feds. Texas has now had about 28 months of straight sales tax improvement, double digits, and we're doing very, very well. Sales taxes are about 63 or 64% of all tax revenue. And I'm telling my husband that since it's my job to be the CFO, and then sales tax are important, I need to shop. So it is our duty to shop when we feel like it because it generates such good money. We also know that back in the mid to late 80s, we lost our shirts. About 300,000 jobs, about 400 banks, and things were very, very difficult. And we really made two strategic decisions across the state after that. One was to diversify the economy. We are now, as an economy, more diverse than either of our neighbors, Canada or Mexico. And we also stashed cash. They set up the rainy day fund in 88, voted in 89. We now have today about $6.3 billion sitting in it. I would expect to make another transfer in September or October, and it comes from severance tax dollars pegged to 1989 numbers. So wherever that gap is, in 1989, oil was about 44 bucks. Today it's 85, 90, and that difference between 44 and 85, that severance tax, a lot of that goes to the rainy day fund. Gas, unfortunately, is not where it was. In fact, in 89, gas was about 4 bucks, and now it's unfortunately 2.5 or something. So the rainy day fund is doing great, and we are diverse. All of that is good. But the challenge for us is that we have this kind of chart coming, and this is something that I have spent a lot of time thinking about. What are the pressures on your state tax dollars and your state spending? We've got these pieces of paper here, but I think sort of the way the chart changes shows you something. In 2001, red, Medicaid was about 14% of your general revenue spending. What's general revenue? It's your state tax dollars. It's not federal income tax. It's no federal money. It's all state tax dollars. And the blue is public ed. Public ed at that point was about 44.9%, 45%, and green is everything else. Green is highways, water, criminal justice, courthouses, higher ed, everything. When they go to 2011, Medicaid has grown. You can see the red chunk of the pie has grown. It's up to 20% plus. And public ed has shrunk down to 41.3%. And of course, there's been a shrinkage here and everything else. Under the Affordable Care Act, which you all have heard about the Supreme Court ruling a couple of weeks ago, under the Affordable Care Act as written, Medicaid costs in Texas would have grown to over 37%. It would have put pressure on public ed down to 37%. The two together would add up to 75%. 3/4 of the budget of the general revenue would be taken up in these two. Look how big Big Red is. It's huge. And so then you have all of the spending has dropped to 25%. This is the best way I have to kind of put in perspective some of the issues that are facing the folks, which is why this whole Medicaid conversation has been so important. So take a look at enrollment. Now, Medicaid enrollment, for any of you who are in hospitals or whatever, in sort of social services, you know that Medicaid enrollment is somewhat economy sensitive. So here we were in 2000. Medicaid enrollees in Texas were 1.8 million people. And remember the dot-com bust? Well, it blipped up. And then it kind of leveled back out again. We were feeling pretty good. So 2004, 5, 6, it wasn't doing much, except for just some general trends, not much. And then, of course, it surged up pretty smartly with this latest recession. Well, we are now at about 3.5 million enrollees, and that's important. These are already enrolled. Well, under the Affordable Care Act, it would have added 17 million Americans, and then to us, about 1.7 million Texans. This is what I call the reverse ski jump. It's very, very, very expensive. This will be in 2014. Well, why is it not until 2023 on this chart? Because under the Affordable Care Act, the feds, which is actually, I don't know why we think it's not us, it is us, the feds, so-called, under federal taxes, would pick up a bunch for about 9 years, and then it hits us in 2023. So you can see the numbers coming. The reason I go through this is that we can do everything just right here at home. And you can have great things going on in Brown County, and Brownwood, and Brady, and Abilene. Great things, but these are pretty significant challenges. This is a pretty significant challenge here. This is something that I pay a lot of attention to, and I guess it's because I'm a rancher. But the Endangered Species Act has been something on my mind for about 25 years. It's about 1987 or 8. There was a proposal by U.S. Fish and Wildlife to stop the Boy Scouts at Balmaray, near Balmaray, from riding horses because there was a weed in the water called the little aguja pondweed, and they thought the horses would make it a mess. So I got looking at what are the challenges that we have across the state. There's a website called keepingtexasfirst.org, and if you hit on it, it's interactive. If you hit your county, it will show you how many species under the Endangered Species Act, in particular lawsuit settled, and says that we may have to have looked at in Texas. And I have to tell you something, this is ground zero. This is Bayard County, San Antonio, 25, and this is where my ranch is, Brewster County. That's not a good color. Just so you get the color, the darker the color, the more species, the lighter the color, the fewer species, and unfortunately, there is no county that only has 1 or 2. The next one, which you got a bunch of yellow with the panhandle, is 3 to 4, and then of course you got this attractive kind of purple color down in Brownsville, which is 16 to 21. So let me tell you what you've got here in Brown County. I think you'll find this interesting. What do you have here? Okay. Well, the good news is that the concho water snake has been delisted, and you may be safe for a while. But the false spike mussel, the mountain bird plover, the red knot another bird, the smooth pimpleback mussel, the Sprague's pipit bird, the Texas fawnspike mussel, the Texas pimpleback mussel are all coming to a neighborhood near you. And so these are challenges that you may have under litigation. What's so interesting about all of this is that this website also covers besides the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and things that the Environmental Protection Agency is doing. So I'm sort of trying to show you that all of this thing is sort of coming from Washington. You have about $16 trillion in national debt at the federal level, about $1 trillion annual deficits, and then you have Medicaid, and we'll see what the state does on Medicaid, and then you have the Endangered Species Act, etc. You may have heard that we just were able to temporarily at least dodge the bullet of listing the dune sagebrush lizard. That's the little guy out there. The reason we dodged that bullet was that the oil and gas sector really got high behind, and they went and hired about 20 biologists. This lizard kind of goes underground in the summer, by July the 1st. So these guys were out there. They had 21 biologists, and they surveyed these 5 counties, and they found lots and lots of lizards. Which is good, so they found lizards, they don't need to list it. But there is a story about a cactus ferruginous pygmy owl, and it's down here, it's down in the King Ranch. This pygmy owl was proposed for listing by the Center for Biological Diversity, the same people who have done all the lawsuits. It was proposed in 1992, and then there was a multi-year litigation lawsuit. It was finally listed in about 98 or 9. Then immediately, because you can't object until they list. You don't have any legal standing to object until they list. And then the opponents down there, the ranchers down there, objected. It took them a number of years. It was delisted in about 2004. And then about 2005, probably off by a year or two, 2005, there was a Ninth Circuit agreed that it could be delisted. And now, as part of this newest settlement of last summer, the ferruginous cactus pygmy owl is back on the list. 20 years. So the point is that you sort of never know it's over until it's over. Well, what are some of the challenges facing everybody? And they're all local. Everything, unfortunately, is local. And the challenge for us is not knowing what's going to happen with Medicaid, is are there any smart things we can do to share space, or do some things if you see the pressure that I'm very concerned about on public ed, higher ed, cities, counties, etc. All three of my children are products of public education. And you've got some challenges going ahead with some expenditures and enrollment at this level. This is not any single district. Lots of districts have huge growth, explosive growth, or they have to build new buildings. It simply says that if this pressure comes, smart things like maybe sharing space or buying buses together or buying online supplies, any of those would be a help, because I think Big Red may come unless the state of Texas does not adopt the Medicaid expansion. How about local debt? Local debt's actually fairly high in Texas, and it's partly because the state of California, for example, assumes more of local obligation than the state does. So in a sense, it's simply a number to think about. We're second only to New York in debt outstanding. Not debt, does not include debt service, does not include what we pay per annum on interest. But we're at about $8,000 per head, and New York is about $8,700 per head. And so why does all this matter? Why does local debt matter? Well, right now, cities are 1/3 of all local debt. Schools are 1/3, and everything else is 1/3. Right now, we're not paying much in interest. So it's okay right now. It's the water's fine. It's okay to borrow some money. I'm going to give you an example though on how important it is to have your standing in good order. Every year, y'all pay property tax. You probably pay in November, December, and schools don't get the money until later on. They start logging. They've got to be funded. So the state of Texas, I go up to New York, and I go to Moody's, Fitch's, and Standard & Poor's, and I go to the market, and I say, we've got to borrow some money. And we went in last year, we borrowed $9.8 billion to pre-fund public schools, and we were AAA rated, and because people want a Texas note, they want Texas debt, the bidding got so high, they bid it up to about $24 billion, which meant we could offer lower interest. We had to pay as much. Well, guess what the state of Texas had to pay for $9.8 billion because of the great demand? 0.27%. 0.27%. So we can afford it. So a week later, this to put in perspective, our friends the Italians, who live la dolce vita, they want to retire early and not do anything right, they went out also, weirdly enough, I'm sorry, I'm pro-Texas. They went out for $9.8 billion a week later, and nobody wanted it. So they had to keep raising the interest rate that they would have to pay. Guess what the Italians had to pay? 6%. That's why you have to pay attention, though, to local debt. What you do today, unless you have a fixed note, could change tomorrow. So that's why I say, take a look at all of this, because we're all part of the national picture, part of the international picture. If the European Union does not get its act together, if Greece and Italy and Spain and France, Monsieur Hollande, if they cannot get stuff together, all that sort of contagion is going to slow people down, and exports and slow things down, which means less revenue, which means everything is stressed out. Now, one little happy bright spot. I have some money to talk about for this area. We have a website called www.claimittexas.org, and we have unclaimed property. And I want to tell you about the mistake I made when I went online, and I typed in my kids, and I typed in my father, and typed in everybody. So I found that my middle son, Blaze, had $400. So I got him the money. The check, of course, was made out to Blaze Duran, and I handed it to him, and I realized, wait a minute. That was the apartment deposit I paid for him to go to college. So my advice is, don't give money until you've cut a deal with the family member. I got not a dime of that back. However, happy news for you here. We decided to do a little research. Okay. The city of Brownwood has $264.95. Brownwood ISD has $95.49. The county has $230.77. And in Brown County, there are 11,868 accounts for people with dollars totaling up to $1,164,722. So don't say I never told you about any good money. So there are a few dollars out there, so you can go ahead and get your big bucks. I guess what I want to say, I'll open up the questions, is that Texas is doing better. We work at it harder. We try harder. But we're facing, I think, some headwinds. And the headwind is Medicaid, and the headwind is all of this federal stuff. And my only caution to anybody is, whether you're associated with any governmental entity or just a citizen, is take a look. Because I think things are going to get tough. I think Europe is not going to get its act together necessarily. And we can be good as gold here in Texas, and we're going to be affected. So my suggestion is, be smart as you acquire debt. Be smart as you look at expenses. Are there any things you can do to collaborate, be innovative, be creative with other folks? I know of one place where the city, the school district, and the police department all co-built an administration building saving jointly $4 million. And, you know, cities and counties can co-do things. Schools can co-do things. It's just a thought down the road. Okay, I'm happy to, yes, sir, question.
More of a comment. I'm the county judge with regard to the Medicaid. I see that our indigent health care expense has been spiking over the past few years to the point that that is one of the biggest unknowns when we budget from year to year. And I know that Texas changed its reimbursement calculation 5 years ago or so. I'm assuming that that reimbursement could have come from the Medicaid fund. And that so it's not just state, it's local that's going to cause our taxes to increase by itself.
Texas did pass last session a bill called a health compact bill.
And we have entered into negotiations, as a matter of fact, conversations with our local hospitals.
Great. Well, the compact I'm talking about is national. There are 5 states that have done this, and if Congress allows it, the Senate and the House have to permit it. In which case, what they would do is they would send you the money by block grant, but each state could then devise how they would cover it. I was down in McAllen 2 weeks ago, and there is a private hospital there which births 800 babies every month, which is the same as basically an elementary school. Yeah, and it's just very, very challenging. And there in the valley, there are no more public hospitals; they're all private. And I was actually amazed at their neonatal intensive care unit. I've never seen anything like it. And I said, "Well, how do you manage it? How do you survive?" And he said, "We are so efficient. They have 70% of their client base is Medicaid, where generally most physicians it's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%, something like that." And I think it's this morning's paper said that huge rate drop of physicians wanting to treat either Medicaid or Medicare. And those are the very expensive populations, end of life, start of life, very expensive. And it's just a real challenge. So whether from the county judge perspective or the city perspective or the state perspective, it's very, very expensive, and it's not shrinking. Sir?
How much of that local debt is unfunded mandates from the state?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. And I get asked that a lot. I don't have anywhere to do this. I do know that we put together an effort to try to find out what the cost of unfunded mandates were for the school districts. I've got some data on that. Some of it is hard to assess. So if we tell a city or a county or somebody, you got to go do some stuff, and it's not giving you a bill like a printing bill or something, it's really human, it's very hard to get that. And I think that the Texas Association of Counties, the Texas Municipal League, all those folks are very cognizant of administrative burdens, even if it's hard to assess. And that's true of school districts. It can be very hard to assess new testing. For some places, a new test may not be that additional expense. Well, this is just horrible. So it varies widely from district to district and city to city.
From what options does the state have, if any, to combat the Medicare or Medicaid spending by 2023?
Well, I think the governor is probably going to tell the feds thanks but no thanks, and under the Supreme Court opinion, he can do that. But they're going to require under that legislation, and under the opinion, they're going to require health care exchanges, and I don't have any idea whether they'll be more efficient or not. But many states took a look at this kind of picture. This is not isolated to Texas. Took a look at this and said, this won't work. This is absolutely unmanageable because public ed, higher ed, every single thing else is in trouble. And Texas is doing better. Our overall unemployment number is about 6.9. I guess down here it's about 5.5, something like that here. The valley is 9–10%. And so the question is there going to be any interest right now in raising taxes? I would say not. I think everybody really wants to find out what happens to the United States Congress and how much, it's kind of like the frog in the water on top of the stove. At some point it gets really, really hot and you got to get out. And so I don't know where the hot water is, but I know that I think $50,000 per baby for the deficit, the debt, is a big number. It's a big number. But I think there will be a concerted effort to not do this, to stop this. And the question would be, nobody really knows. If we say as a state, no, we're not going to do it, what does that really mean? I don't know what that really means. I think a lot of people don't know. I mean, this the opinion is sort of finished. Yes, sir.
TABC.
Yes, sir.
How many millions of dollars do they take in a year?
How many millions does the TABC take in a year?
Yeah, the 14% mixed beverage tax.
I don't think that number.
Some restaurants pay over $100,000 a month in Dallas.
I'll get you that number if you want me to.
Well, 14% mixed beverage tax. And then the fees for the permit, the one-day permit, I see they went up $30 more this year.
I don't know what the TABC did.
Oh, well, we send a check to that.
Was it made out to be? There have been a lot of conversations with various groups about changing that tax. It's legislative, and all I try to do is I'll do whatever the legislature asks me to do, but I try to run numbers to show you how would you do this. And you do if then. The mixed beverage tax is extremely complicated for us to administer and for the TABC to come out and check.
Well, it just seems like that's got to be in the multi-million dollars.
Well, it's multi-billion, but it's not billion. But I do pay attention to beer. The reason I pay attention to beer is because beer is a sign of confidence. And if you're drinking fancy beers as opposed to non-fancy, I'm not going to give anybody's name because I get the wrong one, then you're feeling perkier. And so I've got some data that, in fact, calories drove a big shift from regular beer to lights about 5 years ago, and then another big shift went to microbreweries and foreign beers and stuff, and so the beer numbers are up. By the way, I say this as a former rabid prosecutor. We got some information that some stores where people went in and bought cigarettes and bought beer and alcohol, you would pay in your sales tax, you would, John Q. Public, pay sales tax, but then they got with poverty now. We got a bill tax that gives us a monthly data dump. I know every month which store got 15 six-packs of beer and 15 cartons of cigarettes, and then I can marry that up and find out exactly, did they report on the 15 and 15? We have now recaptured $380 million is sales taxes that John and Mary paid in at the convenience store wherever, and the guy took it. So that's why I like the computer. It's pretty handy because you paid it in. I mean, I know none of you smoke and none of you ever have beer, but this is something tell somebody that you know that might. Anybody want to know why in Texas we're better than anybody else? Okay. Because two reasons. One, and this has been used for a long time, because we are the best shaped state. If you were a boring rectangular shaped state, how on earth could you tell somebody, come to Texas, come to North Dakota? What's the excitement? So here we've got this great shaped state. But the other thing is, I have absolute empirical proof. There were these two guys from Arkansas named Bubba and Buster. And so one day, Bubba says to his friend Buster, I want to come into Texas. And Buster says, they're going to go from Arkansas. And Bubba says, no, they're not. Come on, trust me. So they get in the truck and they drive in. They come to the first town, the northeast corner of the state, and there's this amazing bunch of signs, best you've ever seen. They stop the truck, they get out, and the signs say, shirts $1, pants $1.50, jackets $5. And Bubba hurls himself into the door with his guy behind the counter and says, Mister, I want 10 shirts, 10 pairs of pants, and 5 jackets. And the guy looks at him. He says, you two guys have got to be from Arkansas. Bubba says, well, how did you know? This is a dry cleaners. What is the economic moral of that story? That we don't believe you can get something for nothing. And when you have states which have way overspent, they have enormous unfunded liabilities, like California, they had to give people IOU. You cannot do that forever. Illinois and California and Nevada, those states are still struggling. And the point is that you make choices, and they may not always be palatable, but if you don't run deficits, and you don't run deficits in Texas, you're not allowed to. And so that's why Bubba and Buster's